Gentle startups. So the way we start up a conversation, specifically a potentially negative or controversial conversation, really sets the tone for the rest of the time you two are talking about that issue. This is something that every couple understands, that if you bring up things a certain way to your spouse, it can make the conversation go well or very poorly. So if we pay attention to how we start conversations more, a lot of the times what comes after that is going to end up being more effective, no matter what the topic is or no matter what we say after that initial startup. I think the most effective way to implement gentle startups in your relationship is by thinking about when you're going to bring up an issue to your spouse. Let's say it's about the fact that your spouse keeps leaving dirty dishes in the sink. If the roles were reversed, what would you want your spouse to say to you to remind you to put the dishes away, or to remind you that you guys have made this agreement that you're not going to leave the dirty dishes in the sink? How would you want your spouse to talk to you about that? And then if you're able to replicate that in your own language with your spouse when you bring up the issue, chances are it's going to be a lot more gentle, it's going to be a lot more compassionate, and you're going to show some forgiveness and grace up front instead of coming out swinging, coming out as an attack. So let's look at some examples. In my own marriage, I've found that if I say something like, "Why do you keep leaving dirty dishes in the sink? I've asked you not to do that," that sets us up for a disagreement right away. So let's look at some examples. In my own marriage, I found that if I start out a conversation, let's say about the dirty dishes, with something like, "Why did you leave the dirty dishes in the sink again? I've told you over and over that we are not doing that anymore." That's going to set us up for a fight right off the bat. If I shift that message to something like, "Hey, I love you so much and I know you've had a hard day. Would you mind just moving the dirty dishes over into the dishwasher?" That changes the entire tone of the rest of the conversation. And even if your spouse overreacts in that moment because he's tired or because she's not feeling well or it's been a tough day, which can happen, you can enter a conversation very gently and your spouse might erupt and you might not know exactly why. But chances are, if you're just implementing this gentle startup now and this hasn't been a habit you guys are used to, it's going to take some time for your spouse to recognize that you're trying, recognize that it's not actually an attack and you're just trying to help them out. And that's going to take some adjustment. So stick with it. Even if you don't get the response right away that you want to, this is all about the long game. Communication strategies are all about what's going to work over the long term of your relationship rather than what's going to be what gets you what you want in that moment. One objection I get to this technique is people worrying that it means you're walking on eggshells around your spouse. Maybe you think, well, why do I have to be so gentle? Why can't my spouse just see my intentions? Why does it matter so much how I say something when what I mean is genuine and I'm really trying to make the relationship better? First of all, most people who I've heard say something like that don't follow that rule themselves, meaning that if their spouse says something to them that maybe their spouse had good intention, but they didn't say it in the most constructive way, that person usually isn't happy about it. So even if we don't want to admit it, or even if we wish it weren't true, a lot of the times for all of us, at least in my own experience, when we want to be able to only pay attention to someone's intention, how the message comes across, their tone of voice, the connotation, all of that matters a lot. And so if we can pay a lot of attention to how we're saying something, we're going to end up being a lot more effective in our communication in a variety of scenarios with our spouse. So it's not walking on eggshells. It's not hiding how you really feel. It's not refusing to be totally honest with your spouse. It's still direct. It's still honest, but it's just compassionate. It's just delivering the message wrapped in a gift box that you actually put some effort into instead of just throwing it into an old grocery bag and handing it to your spouse. It's showing that you actually put some thought into how you are bringing up this issue because you have your spouse's best interests in mind.